Welcome to the first episode of our new series, Getting EV Right. Throughout these 3 episodes, we'll be speaking to a number of industry experts, both internal and external, about the challenges, opportunities, and decisions that fleets face with EV adoption. From operations to infrastructure and vehicle selection, we'll break down the complexities of commercial EV adoption using real-world insight and hands-on expertise. We'll move beyond the headlines and explore what it truly takes to make EVs work for your fleet, day in, day out. We hope you enjoy. Now, I'm genuinely excited about our first guest, someone I always look forward to catching up with, usually at one of our own Avon's customer advisory boards. Matthew Munford is one of those fleet managers who just gets it. He has an incredible eye for detail, especially when it comes to understanding vehicles at a really granular level. And you can tell that he's someone who's lived and breathed fleets for years. The kind of person who not only knows the data, but understands what it actually means operationally. He's brought all of that deep expertise into his role at KCOM, and you can absolutely see the impact. In fact, at the time of recording, KCOM have just been recognised at the 2026 Fleet News Awards, winning Fleet of the Year for up to 250 vehicles. A huge achievement and a real testament to the work that Matthew and the team have put in. So, Matt, brilliant to have you with us. Thanks so much for coming down. I know it's a long way from Lincolnshire all the way down to Bristol. But yeah, really keen to start digging into your EV journey. You've got a lot of experience. So yeah, would you mind just giving us a bit of an overview of what that experience actually looks like?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for the invite down, Russ. No worries. Currently work for a company called KCOM in Hull. We're a telecoms provider. Think of us kind of like the BT of East Riding, and provide internet to about 150,000 customers. We've existed for about 125 years. Been there 3 years. Prior to that, I had a short stint with local government, but most of my logistics experience comes down to large companies. So Asda, where I spent 17 years predominantly in their logistics operation.
Wow. So, I mean, in fairness, we were talking about it just before we started recording, but a number of different operations, completely different styles of business as well in there. So I suppose we'll kind of lead in. Oh, first of all, before I do move on, I need to say and acknowledge the award from last week at the time of recording. So, yeah, congratulations. So that's best fleet, is it? Up to 250 vehicles?
Yeah, fleet of the year under 250. So I think it's very much a team effort. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but we've got 150 engineers, people that drive the vehicles for us. So it's their hard work, their careful driving that really pushed through those numbers, which enabled us to win that prize. So it's very much a team effort, and I was delighted to take it home on behalf of KCOM.
Superb, that's fantastic. So just a bit of an overview of your fleet as well. So we've got, you said 150 drivers, they all van drivers, or is that a bit of a mix between?
Yeah, so we have, so our model is predominantly engineer takes the vehicle home. So they're based at home, 8 o'clock in the morning they leave and they drive their vehicle, bring it back at night, which will come on to sort of present some challenges around the EV charging infrastructure. We have a number of spare vehicles based at depot, so depot charging is probably something we've got in scope for that. And then we have some communal or specialised vehicles that any one of the wider teams, team leaders, managers can access if they're doing visits and health and safety tours, etc. So predominantly sort of like 80-90% of our vehicles are engineers taking them home, and then we have another smattering of other vehicles.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Right, okay, so we'll dive into the first one then. So let's focus on why operations can make or break EV success. So in your opinion, why do operations matter so much more in EV than in comparison to ICE vehicles?
Yeah, again, so we were talking just off before we started. I think diesel is pretty straightforward. You fill it up wherever you want, whenever you need, and it's a very quick job, very expensive job, but it's easy to do. I think in terms of when I think back to my time in Asda, some of the challenges for them would be their operation doesn't instinctively allow EV charging, so the vehicles are out for 14 hours a day. There's no downtime. Drivers, hot swaps are in and out. So the opportunity to charge during the day is very challenging, and the mileage they do doesn't allow for an overnight charge. So that operation's distinctly different to KCOM, where we take the vehicles home. We only drive 8 till 4, and the mileage we do isn't a lot. So overnight charging is an option, but again, how do you enable that at people's houses? So I think as we are relatively new to the journey of electrifying our fleet, just trying to understand how your operation impacts that decision, if that makes sense.
I think it's really interesting as well because, like you're saying, with the Asda scenario, those vehicles are they have a smaller window to charge the vehicles. And as a result, that there is potential opportunity, but it would mean some significantly high-powered charging, right? So the infrastructure then is completely different in that model in comparison to the cost of a home charger as well. Was that a factor you had to consider?
Yeah. So again, I think in the home shopping world, it might vary by different companies, but from the experience I've had, middle of the day, the driver comes back and they'll swap. So you've got a window where they're reloading the vehicle. So in theory, yes, a rapid charger could charge that vehicle sufficiently. So if you've got half an hour, you could go 20 to 80% probably. But yeah, the energy requirements, most stores will operate 6 or more vehicles. So if you're trying to charge, say, 6 vehicles at the worst case scenario all at the same time, all on a 100 kilowatt charger, it's unlikely the store would have 600 kilowatts of spare capacity. But then the charger itself, so 30 to 50k per charger, your return on investment on that is going to be incredibly long, and that all cost will ultimately pass on to the customers. And in that competitive environment, that's the last thing they want to do. It's all about making the delivery service cheaper. So I think that there are options to get there, but I think when you look at like the total cost of ownership, buying those chargers would certainly blow that case out the water.
Yeah, it makes it really difficult, doesn't it? And I think this is where, again, it's almost like finding that sweet spot, isn't it, within operations. So, I mean, we'll go back to KCOM. In terms of, so obviously you're saying that your vehicles are returning back to home. So what challenges are you tending to find around the actual home charging and kind of getting that? Where are your issues at the moment?
Yeah, so we're relatively new in our EV journey. So we do have some electric vehicles, predominantly small back to base that do maybe sort of 30, 40 miles a day. So if a manager's going out to do a site visit, they'll take one of the electric vehicles. So they were very easy because they're back to base. We've got a number of AC chargers on site. They're only 33 kilowatt vehicles, so worst case 5 hours of charge. So that was a really quick win. Aside from our really specialised vehicles that carry a lot of payloads, so tippers and vehicles fitted with sort of bespoke equipment, if you park them to one side, our core business is van, so medium-sized traffic, large-sized master. So what we've done, as we've quite early in this stage of our EV journeys, we've surveyed the engineers, just trying to gauge a view of, okay, who wants to come with us on the journey? Who's got their own driveway? Who owns a house? Who's got off-street parking? Who's not interested? Because I think hearts and minds is the first thing. If we're going to really try and deliver a long-lasting solution, we need people are vested in that. So we've done the survey, and surprisingly, we've got a larger number of people than I expected that have the ability to home charge. So they're the ones we're going to go after as sort of the first part of our expanded trial, so to speak.
Brilliant. And how do you view, obviously, it's a conversation I've had a number of times with fleet managers, is about the actual cost of putting a home charger. Have you got any views on that? Like, where's KCOM's view on the actual installing of a home charger?
Yeah, so sort of phase 1 of our trial, we've actually ordered some electric vehicles through Avon's. So our phase 1 is a mini trial, so it's only half a dozen of vehicles. And the primary purpose of that isn't to test the vehicle, it's to test the charging methodology. So we're going to have 2 vehicles charging at home using existing home chargers that our colleagues have.
Okay.
And then we'll use the AER to rebate them, obviously just making sure they're not out of pocket. So it will be a bit clunky to start with, but there'll be a mechanism to recoup the energy they're drawing. The other 2 will be back-to-base charging, so charging at our depots, and the engineers will walk to collect their vehicles.
Okay.
And again, we have people that are interested in that model. And then the final 2 will be public charging, so people live in the 14th story block of flats, clearly out of scope for home charging. So we want to see how that impacts the diary, because we do have 8 till 4 when we operate. Everyone has a half an hour paid window where they have the break. And we just need to understand if that half an hour is enough with the charging infrastructure in Hull to charge the vehicle for the day. Because if we then start to introduce an hour of downtime, that's 12% dead diary time. So then you need 12% more vans, you need 12% more engineers, and that becomes a costly exercise. So we want to test all 3 sort of methodologies of charging. And then that will enable the next step, which is 2027, about what vehicle we buy then and where we deploy that within the team.
Brilliant. I mean, it's a really interesting one, because I think you could look at it instantly and go, okay, well, and a lot of people are obsessed with the cost. We've got another fleet that we're working with at the moment. They're trying to do a trial, and they're just saying, well, we want to prove that it's cheaper. And actually, would it be fair to say that the trial is never going to be cheaper because you're never going to really understand exactly how to get the most out of operations and charging styles and so on like that. That obsession was saying, right, well, we want to get this demo or this trial fleet to prove that it's going to be way more cost effective to move to EV. And then you ask the question, say, okay, how are you charging it? Like a public charging network, it's like, it's not going to happen. The cost isn't really going to come into it at that point. But in terms of when you were saying, obviously, did you have more, were you surprised potentially with how many people would be able to charge at home, and how open were your drivers to actually started to look at transitioning to EV now?
So what we did before we got to the survey question, we took a hire vehicle. So our fleet's predominantly Renault. So we took a Renault Trafic and a Renault Master. We dummy load them, so we loaded the back up to take it up to its gross weight, just to try and replicate worst case scenario. We had the vehicles in the winter again, which was great for the testing. And then literally one of my team, unfortunately, had to drive around Hull most of the day just to kind of replicate stop-start, what we would do on a day just to get that miles per kilowatt hour. Once we all had that data, we were open and honest with our engineers saying, okay, so this is a journey we're on. We want people to come with us. Answer these questions, and then we'll come back to you. I was really pleased by the people that A, are interested, B, that have got their own driveway or their landlord will allow them to install charging infrastructure. So I think the main one was people didn't want to be out of pocket. So if we're fitting the charger, if they leave, how does that look like?
Yeah.
But we have similar kind of arrangements. We spend a lot of money doing training these engineers, digging up roads, etc. So we spend a lot of money on training, and we have a plan where if they leave within a certain period, they rebate some of that.
Right. Okay.
But I think from an electric charging standpoint, we'll do a tender probably next year with a provider that can allow the cost of charging to be directly debited from KCOM itself, rather than the engineer having to do anything on their side. I think once we're in that world, I think the buy-in will be a lot better because the engineers will then have their infrastructure for their own EV if they wanted to in the future. It'll add simplicity to their diary. So I think that will be, 2027 will be the sort of the next leap. As I said earlier, I think for the here and now, it's mainly about testing how those methodologies of charging. So if an engineer charges at home and he forgets to plug in, how does that impact the diary? Yeah. So that's what the sort of stage 2 of the trial will look at.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think from experience, I'm sure you've been exactly, when you do forget and you go, oh no, the next morning, it can be a challenge and it's never a quick fix. That's probably, let's be honest, the biggest challenge we have at the moment from electric. But we'll talk now a bit more, Matt, about building an EV readiness assessment. So what did that look like from KCOM point of view in terms of, like, say, business cases or data that you're actually using to look at transitioning over to electric?
Yeah, so probably one of the big things KCOM looks at is reducing their cost base as much as possible to invest in price for the customer. So we have to be mindful of any time we try and roll out anything, whether it be telematics, new systems, new vans, that isn't cost detriment to KCOM and ultimately the customer. So I mentioned briefly in the last question that prior to doing the survey, we really wanted to understand the range of the vehicles. In the worst case scenario, so air conditioning on in the middle of the winter, dummy loaded. So that was kind of the first stage. We took 2 vehicles for a week just to understand that miles per kilowatt hour. Once we had that, we built a simple model. Now I know a lot of companies, and Avens probably do it as well, will help with that. I love a spreadsheet, so a lot of companies will help customers with that, and I know Avens do. So very simple. On one side you've got diesel, so miles per gallon, the cost of diesel, the range, the lease cost, and on the other side the same for EV, so the cost of the energy. When we did that, we did a public charging, a home charging energy price cap, and then sort of a low rate, 7 pence octopus rate. So across the 3, then it pushed out at the bottom how that compares cost versus cost of EV versus cost of diesel. And I was quite surprised actually that how well the manufacturers are supporting now EVs. I know we've spoken before about ZEV mandate and how manufacturers are really pushing discounts on EVs. So in terms of the Trafic, at the time we made the order, the Trafic EV was actually cheaper purchase price than the diesel variant.
No way.
So actually then all your other numbers are sort of, you can discount
care of, right?
because electricity is cheaper than diesel.
Yeah.
So normally you're relying on one to offset the other. So in that model, on that vehicle, it was a really good case. In terms of the Master being a new vehicle, there was quite a gap between on the lease between the diesel and the EV. Now, on the electric vehicle, it's got vehicle to load. So as a customer, we would normally fit inverters, battery chargers, so systems to enable us to power tools in the vehicle. But now we can draw that from the drivetrain. That's kind of like a tick. We can knock that off the conversion cost. So we're trying to bring the two as close together, hoping then that the price of the electric will be offset. So we're not quite there yet. The mileage is probably a challenge because we don't do a lot of mileage. I think you need to be 60, 70,000 miles over the life of the asset to get that swing the right way for you. But we normally take our vehicles over a 5-year lease. Generally, we've extended them to year 6 and 7. So when we do move into that situation, we'll be looking at Avons to say, actually, rather than going with 5, can we go with 6? And try and build that into the model. Say, okay, the 5-year model doesn't work, but the 6 does.
Yeah. And also what's really interesting, if you go to the 5-6 model, theoretically with EVs, based on the data that we're getting back from a maintenance point of view as well, you're not necessarily going to be exposed to the same kind of downtime and the VOR that's associated traditionally with combustion engine vehicles, because we always see, even after 3rd, 4th, 5th year, there's a real spike, but we don't see the same kind of spiking at the moment from an EV. So again, it allows you to sweat the asset a little bit more, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah, so on our medium-sized vans that do maybe 10,000 miles a year, you think at 7 years, if it was your own vehicle, if you were a builder, would you be looking at getting rid of a 7-year-old 70,000-mile vehicle? No, you're probably looking at second life at that point. So I think from a risk perspective, hopefully Avons will see that as an opportunity to look at longer term. Clearly, on the flip side, when you're Asda and you're doing 50,000 miles a year, you're not going to want to 7-year it into 350,000 miles. No. So it comes back to that, choosing the vehicle to meet your operation. And as I was driving down, I was making some kind of notes as well about how we're choosing our vehicle. So again, I think we're relatively comfortable because of our lower mileage. But I think one of the pitfalls that people might see is that if you are needing, say, 150 miles range, the small vehicle can't do that. So one of the challenges might be the operator having to take a bigger vehicle than they need because of the range. Whereas I think now that charging rates are becoming quicker, if you can accommodate that charging window in your day, I think it allows you now to, rather than taking a bigger vehicle than you need, you can have the right vehicle because there's the solution to charge quickly.
So what I love about this is that this is a real example of not just saying range isn't right, it's a big red cross through it. It's actually saying, well, actually, range isn't quite right, but actually let's have a look at the charging metrics. So it's kind of bringing in a lot more data and a lot more analysis on the actual product, rather than, and this is where, without being dismissive of van decisions in the past, it was a lot easier, wasn't it? You'd look at the vehicle from a technical point of view. Has it got the right internal dimensions, the right payload? Can it tow the right amount? And, oh yeah, by the way, it's diesel. Whereas now there's a lot more to consider. And I know that from my own point of view, when I first came into Avons, the conversations we always used to have, the most complex, would be about the conversion. Right, what do you want in the back of the van? Now every single conversation around commercial vehicles is really about the powertrain. So there's a lot more complex, isn't it, in there to try and make sure that you're considering all elements. So, I mean, in terms of advice, would you say, I'm assuming I'm kind of putting words in your mouth here, but I mean, would you say that it's one of those where you need to look into a lot more depth than potentially you had traditionally, and get your head into that mindset? Yeah,
and I think that's the benefit of a fleet manager that is engaged with his peers, done the research. Again, when I joined KCOM, we had 122 years without a fleet manager, and it was kind of like we did just enough to keep us legal, but people making decisions weren't necessarily skilled enough to make the right decision. So example, kind of like the industry we're in, it's we use a lot of plant, a lot of digging. So it's like, okay, we need 40 vehicles. Let's go and buy 40 transits. Because we need 3.5 ton payload and we need the range of this. Well, actually, you weigh the vehicles. We don't need 3.5 ton payload. Our range isn't what you think because people's not looked at the telematics. No. So I know that our average is about 80 miles a day. We do peak at 130. So I'm happy to accept that a smaller vehicle won't have the range for every single person every day of the month, every day of the year, but it'll accommodate 95%. And then it's how do we manage that 5% anomalies? So because of the relationships we built with the manufacturer, with lease providers, talking to our peers at events, gaining that knowledge, we're able to make the right decision for the vehicle. So I think that's key. Whoever's going to be sort of purchasing vehicles in the future, engage with Avons, get that experience. Don't just think because the range is more or the payload is more than you need, or you can accommodate on electric, that electrics can be discounted.
Yeah. And again, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in the market at the moment is the pace of change. So, I mean, if you're able to start making it work right now, it's only going to get easier as we start to transition to better products. And I think, I suppose we'll kind of come on to that, but have you seen that a marked difference between when you first started looking at electric versus now in terms of the leaps that have been forward there in technology?
Yeah, I mean, even in the brief journey with KCOM, so we've got, say, predominantly vans. We do have randomly one Nissan Leaf, which is sort of 5 years old, kind of like the first generation or the second generation of Leaf. And unless you want to charge it on a CHAdeMO, the DC charging it's quite, I think it's about 50 kilowatts. Yeah. So you can see, I mean, who uses a CHAdeMO these days?
Yeah, very limited nowadays. Isn't it?
And that's only in sort of like 5 years when that vehicle was brand new to where we are today. I mentioned at the start that we're predominantly a Renault fleet. So even in the last few years, the Renault Traffic EV, albeit it's the last of its generation, maximum charge speed of 50 kilowatts. So to charge that 50 kilowatt vehicle is an hour.
Yeah.
Obviously, again, you won't be looking to charge it all in one hit. But then you roll forward to the next generation of Master, and the charging speed there, I think, is 150 kilowatts.
Yeah.
So in a very short window, just from model to model, you've tripled your charging time. So again, for us, that's not so much of an issue. But if I referred back to sort of the Mazda scenario, having a vehicle with a 50 kilowatt battery, 100-mile range, and an hour to charge it, clearly it's not viable. But once you start introducing like 800-watt charging, and I think we were at a meeting at, I think it was a few months ago at BYD, and they demoed their gigawatt charging.
Yeah, unbelievable.
It'd be interesting to see how you draw a gigawatt from the grid. Yeah. Or megawatt. Was it gigawatt or megawatt?
Megawatts, I think it was.
I'll start again there.
No, it's fine. I think megawatt, I think it was. But they've literally just, BYD, the last couple of weeks, they've announced this new battery, the Blade 2, which is now able to do 620 miles on a single battery, single charge, and then also something ridiculous like 10 to 80% in 5 or 9 minutes. And that's a bit of a game changer, isn't it? And that's from an operational point of view. When that starts to hit vans, that really means that we'll start seeing those that are really struggling with the transition to electric because they're saying, I can't fit it in within the day. But suddenly, you're never going to have to, if you've got, as you said, 150 miles and you've got suddenly a 600-mile range, you've got a lot of days before you even need to charge. So the amount of charging downtime that'll be needed, whilst when you start seeing these leaps and bounds in terms of technology, suddenly the game does change at that point, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's like the needle's sort of swung one way and back the other way. So again, sort of when EVs were new, it was the battery, the range. So I remember Asda when we got our first Nissan Leaf, and it would sort of do about 30 miles. It was very new at the time. And you had the range was a problem. Then charging came in, so charging wasn't a problem. Then range is now not a problem. Now charging is coming back in. But then, so if I think in Hull, where KCOM are based, we've got, thankfully, we've got one publicly available Tesla supercharger across the road from our office, so 250 kilowatts. Aside from that, there's pretty much nothing supercharged. Most of the things are sort of 25 to 50 kilowatts. Wow. So now if we introduce, say, a fleet of Renault Masters that can charge at 150 kilowatts, it's like, great, the charge time's there. Now the infrastructure's slow. Yeah. So then we're waiting for the infrastructure to catch up, and then probably the vehicle will supersede it. So it's a very much a chicken and egg scenario, and we're always pushing between the two. Yeah. Thankfully, I think we're in a window where the vehicle and the charging mechanism, there's a route for us. But I do feel for operators that have got more mileage to do, whether that be home delivery, parcel delivery, or indeed sort of HGV fleets, general haulage. Obviously, it presents a more significant challenge for them.
And it's really interesting when you said there, in terms of, I mean, that sounds kind of from the area that I'm Staffordshire way, and then obviously we're down here in Bristol, and there's a number of chargers that seem to be on the main hubs as well with the motorways. But it is, from an operational point of view, it is geographically based as well, isn't it? Like, you're obviously in an area there in Hull where infrastructure isn't necessarily the same. So if you've got a fleet that's operating in different pockets of or different areas of the UK, then the actual operations can be really different, can't they? And affected completely differently depending on where you're operating. So, if you're running a fleet nationally, if you look at Hull, maybe a little bit more challenging. You might look at, say, Staffordshire Way, and you say, actually, no, it works really quite well there. So there's a lot of data that you need to be able to kind of aggregate that. I mean, what have you found the most insightful? I mean, I know you run telematics on your vehicles. Have you used your telematics much in order to kind of give you those insights, or are you aware of maybe scenarios where you could do that?
Yes, you're right in terms of the geography. So I'm Lincolnshire born and bred. I mean, in Lincolnshire, we don't even have a motorway.
No.
So talking about EV infrastructure is sort of like, for a lot of people, that's a sort of a random sort of conversation to be having. So, so Hull, very large city. Infrastructure is not where it needs to be. There are a number of, like say, 22 to 50 kilowatt chargers. So for our model, it pretty much works. But yeah, I think when I talked earlier about that spreadsheet, until you understand the mileage you do and how often you do that mileage, I think trying to build a business case is a real challenge. So probably the first thing we did, aside from testing the vehicles, was we looked at our telematics data just to see, okay, what windows we drive, so start-finish times, so how often are we parked for more than half an hour during the day, average mileage, total mileage, and then breaking it down by team. So we have pretty much half split in our fleet. So 50% of our fleet will be larger, sort of a master derivative that will drive a little bit further. They'll carry a lot of equipment, dig up roads and tarmac. And then the other half of the fleet will be based mainly in Hull, and they'll just do installations, so ladder and basic tooling. So it's not just about what's the average mileage of the fleet. It's not just about the total mileage of the fleet. It's about how your individual teams and the size of the vehicle use. So if you bought 20 vehicles, knowing where you could deploy them, given the range, given the charging mechanism, given where the engineers live, etc. So using the telematics to draw down into that data has been really key. And from our side, the great thing was all the outputs were, there's 5% where you may have to charge overnight and then charge a little bit during the day, but that little bit should be well within a half an hour charging window. Yeah. So as long as we get the buy-in from the engineers, I don't see a scenario in the future where we couldn't electrify nearly all of our vehicles. Right. The biggest challenge would be our tippers, because they pull 3.5 ton diggers. Yeah. And I don't think there's any vehicles yet at the moment, EV, that can pull. I think that new D-Max can, but I think the range is pretty poor on that. So I don't think there's anything tipper-wise that could pull the 3.5 ton. And we have a couple of very specialised vehicles. So I don't think we'll get there fully, but our target internally is 80% EV by 2030, right, which fits really well because our big procurement cycle is 2029. So we've got all the roadmap to get there. It's just about now actually getting there. Yeah.
When you ran the telematics, was there a difference between anecdotal feedback from drivers in terms of what they would associate the kind of mileage that they would, or estimate the kind of mileage that they would be running, versus what the telematics said? Was there a bit of a difference there, or did you find that there was a bit of a pretty good understanding as to how they were using the vehicles?
Yes, I think one of the telematics challenges is what system you choose. So I'm a big advocate. We use Vision Track. We used it in Asda. We used it in local authority. We've used it in KCOM. And the reason we chose that was because I think too often with telematics, and now I'm digressing slightly, is there's a tendency to chuck cameras on vehicles. Yeah. So I think once you understand what you need, so we went with a forward camera and a rear camera for reversing, because that drove down the bulk of our incidents and helped us win a prize. Yeah. But in terms of the actual data, if you're not plugging into the CAN, where do you get your ODO from? Yeah. So GPS from telematics isn't particularly reliable. So actually, in terms of mileage, we used our vehicle compliance app. So every morning, the engineer will complete a vehicle check, record the mileage on the app. Right. So we actually used the start-finish mileage from a different system because we had more faith in how robust that was versus the GPS sort of inherent inaccuracies. That's interesting. So we didn't rely completely on telematics. Where we did use telematics was kind of like idling time. So if we're parked 6 hours roadside and we've got beacons on, quite often we'll run a diesel vehicle. you run the diesel engine. Obviously, on the new world, if you're using vehicle to load, you're using the drivetrain battery. So there's a consideration there. All that kind of data, looking at start time, finish times, initial driving times, how often they come to base, how long they come to base. Because we've got 15 telephone exchanges. If we were to put slow charges in there, it's not going to be enough to rapid charge the vehicles. But if we know that they go in there once a day for their lunch break, actually let's fit chargers.
Yeah.
It might only be 3.5 kilowatts they put in, but that could be enough. And in the scenario I spoke about earlier, where we know 95% can charge in a day, that might be enough to get rid of that 5%.
To bridge that gap. Yeah, no, without doubt. So, I mean, it's really interesting there. So, obviously, in terms of optimizing downtime and VOR, are you having to think quite differently in the way that in terms of your operations, and how's that been in terms of kind of carrying that message across to your business? Because you understand the vehicles really well, we know that, and you've got the analysis and the data. But in terms of kind of having those stakeholder conversations, how's that been? Has that been a challenge, or has there been quite an openness to looking at maybe changing operations from a day-to-day point of view as well?
Yeah, so I'm keen trying not to change the day-to-day. I say we've been 125 years of trading, so we've got a really strong foundation of how we deliver our job. And I think as a fleet manager, my job's there to make life easier for them, not to make it harder. So I'm keen where entirely possible that we don't affect the diary, we don't introduce any downtime. We've made great inroads in VOR. So one of the things we did was we standardised the vehicles. So we now have two types of vehicles, a medium and a large, but they are interchangeable, so they're configured the same. So we need to make sure that we're not taking vehicles that can do the range and a tick financially, but a cost detriment in terms of needing more of them because they can't fit a different team over here. So there's a lot of consideration around speccing the right vehicle. In terms of downtime, I think it's very early days. We don't have that many EV vehicles, and they just touch wood. They just don't go wrong. I think the biggest issue we've had on some of the Renault Kangoos is after 5 years, the 12-volt battery is going flat. Yeah. Or people think, the drivetrain battery's full, I won't put it on a charge, not realising that by plugging it in, you're charging the 12 and the drivetrain battery, and then they come to it and the 12 volts flat. So there is a bit of education on there. But yeah, in terms of VOR, we haven't really seen much on the EV, if anything. And I'd like to think that manifests itself in a better lease rate, because the maintenance, the R&M side from Avens will be a lot lower, which helps that TCO model. Yeah.
It's interesting because the data is still quite fresh, because we've got, again, not quite 125 years of experience, but we've got a lot of data on combustion engine vehicles and what happens to them in life and so on. And obviously because EV is a newer powertrain, but we're starting to get, better data sets, but it's just nowhere nearing the same kind of comparison in terms of number of events. But I think what we do see is that they don't go wrong as frequently. But when they do go wrong, sometimes they can be, depending on the manufacturer, they could be off the road for a little bit longer, but it just doesn't tend to happen as often. But again, that's changing, and depending on the manufacturers that we're working with, that can vary quite significantly. So Matt, if you don't mind, we'll just dive in a little bit around TCO as well, because obviously our TCO Plus includes VOR, so we actually look at all the in-life data as well. But how's that kind of factored into some of your operations and calculating some, especially when you're looking at alternative powertrains?
Probably the best example would be a couple of years ago, so not long after I joined KCOM, we were due to procure about 70 vehicles. So we went out to tender, Avens being one of them as our incumbent. So we put forward some suggestions about chassis. We have good rates with Renault. And Avens came back with a few options, and most of them were in sort of the ballpark. But probably one of the questions I get asked is why we went with Renault. A lot of people in our industry go with Ford as an example. So I think outside of the lease price, we were keen to look at things around. So we operate in an urban environment. Unfortunately, at the time we were losing a lot of wing mirrors. So how much the wing mirror costs? So that was a factor. The MPG of the vehicles. The downtime from the dealer, so our Ford dealer is very close, but they're horrendously busy. And from a practical experience of the years before I joined KCOM, downtime from that dealer in particular was quite poor, whereas Renault was very favourable. So aside from the actual initial capital price or the leasing price, we were keen to understand other factors that may impact that decision. So we came to the decision of Renault because not only was it a good lease price, the repair costs and repair methods were quite cheap. We do have a Renault dealer next door, albeit trucks. The Renault van dealer in Hull is very good. You can get in there very quickly. when it's chargeable, the costs are very favourable. So I think wrapping it all up drove us towards a Renault as a product, which in hindsight was a great decision because the Renault EV product looks to be really good for us, particularly the Master. And I talked a bit about the vehicle to load capability. That's probably going to take £2,000 off our conversion. Yeah. So aside from the traditional, how much it costs to lease, how much the cost of the energy, particularly as a customer that has a lot of bespoke conversions, it's how does EV impact those other decisions you might. Even things like tyres, the vehicle's heavier. If we damage a tyre, is that going to be more prevalent? So therefore, is there more cost from tyres? So yeah, understanding all them decisions. And because EVs are fairly new, especially for KCOM, a lot of those outputs you might not know for 2, 3, 4 years' time, given the mileage we drive. But I think we're in a really positive journey. I think the relationship with Avens has been a game changer. I think the local relationships with local garages via Avens has been really good in driving our VOR down. And I think just using the data, taking time to make the right decisions, and then presenting them to the stakeholders in a succinct fashion to get that decision it's just been a really good 2 or 3 year journey we've made.
Yeah. So to drill in a little bit on that, you were saying about the not actually maybe having as much data as possible. And although we're saying that our own data set is a little bit smaller in comparison to combustion engine vehicles, we've still got thousands of EVs that we're operating in loads of different environments. So I suppose that's, again, it's all data. It's having those conversations, those two-way and sourcing the data to be able to help make practical decisions as well. So I would definitely say that, make sure that any fleet manager that's dealing with Avens to come and speak to us and get that data out of us, because I think we presented to you recently around the tyres and looking at some of the trends that we've seen from EVs and how on the cars, tyres are getting bigger. They're getting more specific to different models as well, which can, again, operationally, you would think, just drive into a quick fit, pick up a normal tyre. Well, no, maybe not, because depending on the brand, that tyre might not be available now. We're almost going backwards because of this transition and this obsession with having very thin, very big tyres that are on EVs as well. And these are all challenges and slight nuances that kind of need to be factored in, don't they, when you get making these bigger fleet decisions. But luckily, you as a proper fleet manager, you know how to handle that. So.
Yeah, and you're right that Avens have got sort of 200,000 vehicles, so your small data set is far bigger than ours. And I probably liken it to KCOM's owned by an Australian bank called Macquarie Group. They own a lot of companies across Europe in particular. A lot of them are invested in green technology, so offshore wind farms, etc. And we hosted the health and safety event not long ago, and we were talking about how we're reducing incidents in KCOM and how we can share that data. And I think if I were to liken it to this conversation we're having now, and if there's someone listening to this podcast or watching this podcast very early in that EV journey, particularly if they're sort of 40, 50, 60 vans, a very small fleet, maybe don't even have a fleet manager, I think reaching out to Avens or a peer or someone in the industry that can help shape that based on the journey that they've made, I think is vital. Don't go into it blind, because if you commit to a 5-year lease on the wrong vehicle, it could be a very expensive mistake. So, yeah, there's a lot of expertise out there. I'd encourage people just to draw on that.
Definitely. And it's getting more, isn't it? There's more fleets that are transitioning. We're seeing, and I think what's really interesting from my point of view is speaking to you as an operator of still a big fleet, but it's a smaller fleet from some of the mega fleets that we hear that have transitioned, who have probably talked about it for quite a long period of time and maybe put people under pressure. And you think, well, how have they managed to make it? But again, some of those operations are so standardized in terms of they have the same route and they know exactly where they're going. They can kind of figure it out. Whereas I think what's really interesting about your fleet is it's stop-start. It's a bit more nuanced as well in comparison. And then, like say, your history, you've then got some really challenging, basically the vehicles just don't stop as well. So I think today's been a fantastic overview as to where operations, how they need to be considered, how it doesn't necessarily mean that one vehicle is going to be fit for purpose for every single business. You've got to understand the vehicle and also your operational requirements to be able to match the two up as well. And I think what you're a perfect testament to is drilling into that detail to be able to start pulling that out. So no, fantastic. Really, really appreciate your time on that. So in terms of if you were to give any advice, what's the one mistake that you've seen or heard through the industry, through conversations that you think people make on a regular basis, and what would you suggest to kind of overcome that?
So probably two that jump to mind would be engaging with your staff. So at the end of the day, they're the people who are going to be driving the vehicle. So I'm not saying that you should shape your procurement around their requirements. You may end up with all Mercedes Sprinters.
Yeah.
But understanding their concerns and help engage with them. So we did a lot of that. We run a staff engagement group once a month. Actually, it's tomorrow, depending on when you listen to this podcast. So we use that to cascade ideas and suggestions to the team because they're the ones going to be using the vehicle. So I think engaging is one of the key ones. And the second one is don't try and do too much too quick. Don't just buy. If you need, say if you're a medium-sized operator and you need 20 vehicles, don't just go and buy 20 vehicles because they're cheap. You need to understand, are they the right vehicles? Yeah. And as we talked throughout the whole podcast, for us in particular, it's understanding the vehicle, how you're going to charge it, the mileage it can do, the weight it can carry, how you're going to have to introduce downtime during the day, how does that impact the diary? So it's understanding all those small elements and steps to build up a full business case to be able to justify to yourself and your business that, particularly if it's going to need an investment, what's the output going to be? So yeah, I think take your time, trial, second trial, third trial even, before you commit to that 5-6 year lease on a lot of vehicles.
Perfect. And one final question. Which myth out of all myths that you've ever heard around EV would you like to debunk the most? What's the most frustrating one that you hear?
Well, as a driver of a Tesla, I don't think they catch fire more than a diesel version of a car. So that's probably something you see on a lot of forums. Aside from that, I'll probably say EV infrastructure. So now if you look at like government targets, the UK is miles behind where we should be doing in terms of EV infrastructure. And I know I talked at the beginning about Hull being a challenge. But I think if you actually go out there and look, and as an EV driver, I do see a lot more charges. I know a lot of them are based on motorways. So again, it comes down to your operation. But I think most environments, whether it be a mixture of home charging, depot charging or public charging, I do struggle to see a scenario where most companies couldn't transition some or all of their fleets. And I know the extreme example was, we talked about Asda at the start, but if you're in London or Birmingham or a big urban area, there's still opportunities for those guys to transition. It might not be the whole fleet, but ultimately by 2035, we're going to be there.
Yeah.
So we need to be looking at those incremental steps. Some people can move faster than another. So again, 80% of our fleet will be electric by 2030. That's our target. I'd like to go faster than that. But yeah, I have reservations about the EV infrastructure, but I do think it will get there. But I don't think it's going to be a deal blocker for us anyway.
I think that's it, isn't it? You know, there are challenges as well, but you've got to understand your operations. You know, the key is yes, there are challenges out there, but if you understand how your operations fit within your local infrastructure, that's coming. That's motoring along quite nicely at the moment. And we are a bit behind, but we're definitely coming at pace, I think, right behind it as well. So Matt, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time. And as ever, it's always great. Your insight, your depth of knowledge on product as well is always, it always intimidates me to a certain extent where I'm like, oh, no, Matt really knows his stuff.
Flattery.
But no, fantastic. Thanks so much for your time, mate. And thanks for making the journey down here.
And thanks for the invite. Thanks, Russ.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for the first episode of this series. We hope this has been a useful listen and that you've taken away something from today. Keep an eye out for the next episode where we'll look at everything infrastructure. See you then.